Welcome to this forensic science installment of crime scene investigation and evidence collection techniques. Take a look at the objectives that we'll cover today. Alright, so we'll jump in with the basis for trace evidence, which makes up a large portion of the physical evidence that could be collected from a victim, a perpetrator, or from the crime scene. And it goes back to Dr. Edmund Locard's principle of exchange. Basically, when there's contact between an object and another person, or person to person, there's a cross-transfer of physical material. This could be hair evidence, fiber, paint chips. This could be biological evidence in the way of body serum, or within the study of serology. So this graphic here shows the basis behind this idea of Locard's principle of exchange. And within the evidence types, we've talked about direct evidence, which, while its name suggests that it's very helpful, purposeful in criminal justice, that direct evidence is testimonial evidence. So the eyewitness testimony, which can be a very helpful thing, but as we've studied, can be also a little bit misleading. So where possible, investigators definitely prefer to at least have corroborating circumstantial evidence. So circumstantial evidence is in contrast to the direct or eyewitness testimony, and circumstantial meaning that it has been left there by circumstance through Edmund Locard's principle of exchange. And circumstantial evidence can then be separated into two different types: physical and biological. So physical evidence would be things like fingerprints. Biological evidence would be something that would come straight from the body in terms of body serum, which could be semen, vaginal secretion, even sweat, blood, hair would be another example of biological evidence. So, what do you think? Fingerprints. And these happen to be visible fingerprints, which are called patent prints, and they are left in blood, in the medium of blood here. Trace evidence or not? If you're thinking that they would be a form of trace evidence, then you would be correct. And specifically, if we look back, it's a type of circumstantial and physical evidence. It is also trace evidence because it's left in small quantities. So, getting a better idea of the crime scene investigation team. First of all, thinking about who is at the crime scene. Police, that would be listed first here because they would be the ones in charge of securing the scene. And it is possible that the district attorney would be there as well. Definitely crime scene investigators who would be doing photography, collecting evidences, perhaps the medical examiner and or coroner, depending on the jurisdiction. In Forsyth County, we have a coroner-based system. Cobb County, for example, has a medical examiner. Detectives, and perhaps forensic specialists. So let's say that there is blood spatter evidence that is located at the scene. There are people who specialize in blood spatter analysis, and they may be there to help the investigation as well. Alright, this is helpful to remember, the 7 S's of the crime scene. So the first thing is securing the scene, and that would be done by police who are carrying firearms, unlike the crime scene investigators, which is contrary to what we see on most of the shows. Separating the witnesses. Why is this important? Well, if we have multiple witnesses and they have a chance to corroborate a story together before talking to the police, then that may be a problem. So we need to separate the witnesses and isolate them. Scanning the scene. Seeing the scene. And this includes an element of that deep observation that we talked about in a former lecture. Sketching. Searching for evidence, and then securing the collected evidence. So we're going to talk about the means of how to collect that evidence. So when sketching a scene, It needs to be done to scale. And even in this electronic age of technology, handwritten sketches can be very important while on the scene. So the idea is to put in essential case information as well as a scale. Okay, you remember we've talked about crime scene search patterns. So as we go down those 7 S's, searching for the evidence should be done systematically. And depending on the location and the expanse of the scene, the size of the scene, then these different search patterns may be more appropriate. Packaging the evidence. Okay, so one way to package evidence is to create an evidence bindle. And when I first learned about this, I was really shocked because it seems like kind of unofficial. But you take a plain sheet of paper, you'll fold it along these creases that you see here, and then you would place the evidence of interest in this X. You then fold it together so that it is surrounded by the paper, and then you would seal it and then write your name over that seal, and that's an evidence bindle. Now, for every type of evidence collected, we've mentioned the chain of custody, and that's so important. Evidence, no matter how great that it is in terms of suggesting innocence or culpability, is inadmissible in court unless it has the proper documentation. So the evidence would need to be labeled as to when it was recovered by whom, case number, and so forth, and then the chain of custody. And this links who was in custody of that evidence and every change of hands that it had, going all the way to the lab and the investigation done there. And this is one example of what that can look like, sealing and then signing over that seal along with a record of the chain of custody. So in conjunction with that, bagging the evidence, you add the identification, sealing it, and signing it across that edge. One thing that's interesting is that when the evidence is opened back up by the investigator, that you actually don't want to open it at the old seal. You want to actually cut a new opening. So maybe your evidence is in a paper bag and it's folded over 3 times, been sealed, signed over. You want to cut a new opening, and then once you're done with it, then you would seal it back, sign your name over that new opening. So at that point, the evidence would need to be analyzed, taking a look at the facts, processed by the lab, and then it's going to be followed through by the detective, who's going to try to analyze and see how those facts fit together. Potential of lab results can show reliability of witness accounts, establish identity of suspects or victims, or show suspects to be innocent, or link them with a scene or a victim. So it's very important to have that physical evidence, hopefully in conjunction with the direct evidence. Another thing that can be accomplished through crime scene investigation is a reconstruction of the scene, and it's very important to be able to reconstruct the scene, to be able to reconstruct the events that happened at that scene. And so just like any other science, you form a hypothesis of the sequence of events, and you evaluate it through the evidence that you have. Now, crime scene reconstruction has gone from a little bit more of a rudimentary art to using more technology, and so currently there are technologies and softwares out that can really do an incredible job of allowing you to visualize that scene based on the dimensions and other things that can be measured through the use of lasers at the scene. Another reason to reconstruct the scene is to be able to pick up on a staged crime scene. So if you've interviewed the witnesses, which by the way is done by the detective, not by the crime scene investigators, as you see on TV. So you've interviewed these people, and then the CSIs have collected the evidence, brought it back to the lab, they're analyzing it, and you find a discrepancy between the evidences and that direct evidence or testimony, then you may have something going on there. So examples of a staged crime scene could be staging a fire to cover up bankruptcy, staging a suicide to cover up murder, staging a burglary to collect the insurance money. So several things to consider in determining whether the crime scene was staged. So if there was a wound, does the weapon that is at the scene match the wound that it allegedly inflicted? Could the wound be easily self-inflicted? Mood and actions of the victim before the event and of the suspect before the event. I think this is an interesting example. Obviously you have the footprints and blood here, and the investigator noticed that the heel of this print, which would be assumed to be the subsequent step after having stood here, isn't a natural step because it overlaps with the toe of the former print. So you see how paying attention to detail can be the difference maker here. Alright, so take a look at the summary for this chapter, and thanks for tuning in.